going on, everybody? Today's currently Monday, December 9th, and it's an exciting day. We're on our way to Shimano's US headquarters in Irvine, California to learn all about and get installed on my bike the next generation of XTR Di2. Believe it or not, it's actually been over 10 years since the first gen of mountain bike specific Di2 launched. About 2 years after that, cheaper XT version came out, but since then, there's been no updates, no new iterations of Di2, which sounds crazy, but that first generation was quite tedious to install. It was expensive, and since then, SRAM has pretty much cornered that market with their wireless electronic axis and now transmission drivetrains. So I'm really excited. We're getting to go straight to the source, learn all about it today, and then this doesn't actually come out until April, I believe. So over the next 4 months, I'm going to get the chance to ride it a ton. My goal is to put as many miles on the group set as well as the brakes as I can and report back with how it performs, how everything stands out, and hopefully try to answer that question of, is Shimano finally a key player in the electronic mountain bike drivetrain space? Alrighty, we're gonna start from the top and get everything installed on my bike. We have Nick Murdoch from Shimano. He's the mountain bike product manager. We're just gonna go from, my bike obviously has nothing on it, and as we go through things, he's gonna touch on what's new, what's exciting, things that people need to know about all this stuff. I have a pretty broad question for you. Why has it taken 10 years to see the next generation of XTR Di2?
The real answer there is that it took a couple extra years to figure out ways around the patents.
Okay.
It was very clear that the market wasn't going to accept anything other than a full wireless system, and it was hard to figure out. Like, we had a good wireless protocol from the roadside, but those road rear derailleurs still have a wire that goes to a battery that mounts on the bike, so we had been making good progress, but that was a tricky thing to figure out. We cracked that code a couple years ago and have been working on perfecting. So the battery lives inside the parallelogram, and our electrodes are deep inside of there, and they've got a small O-ring seal around them.
Mm-hmm.
So it being well inside the battery and small surface area of that seal means that it's very well protected from the elements. Being inside the parallelogram means that it's very well protected from any damage. Mm-hmm. And then the way that this door works, it's actually this metal wedge at the bottom is the functional part. So it slides into this track and pushes the battery up against that seal. So even if you were to smash off this plastic cover, that metal wedge is going to stay behind. So there's no way that your battery's coming out on the trail. So now that we got juice to that thing, we need to pair it. There's a little button on the derailleur. Let's hold it until the blue light comes on and then hit add. So we found RDM9250. That's us. So we're going to pair it by just clicking one of these guys. And then there is a QR code on the side of the deal. We are paired. So then we have got some cool little options in here. The way that the shifter connects through the rear derailleur, we kind of need to wake things up. So it's just asking me to press the levers and set so that it can find it and know what it is. We have got our two little shift paddles that are in the same place as they are on our mechanical system. Okay. And then we've also got this extra third button right there. So it's called the A button inside of here. We can do some e-bike stuff. D-Fly is like a third-party computer head, like a Garmin or something that you could use that to scroll through pages or shortcut to a map screen, turn on the backlight, something like that. Shifting adjust mode is the one that we will select. That means that pressing and holding that guy will turn your shifter into a barrel adjuster so you can fine tune the adjustment. If you ever do ride with a Garmin, then I'd switch it over to D-Fly channel 1. We have also got options for shifting speed. So if you wanted to use this wireless derailleur with an e-bike, you could put it in e-bike mode and it'll have a little bit of a delay between shifts. But I've turned that off so that it'll shift even faster. That's kind of the highlight of the Hyperglide Plus system, especially once we go electronic is that this will be a lightning fast shifting bike. So we definitely want to play around with that, take advantage of it. In fact, our shifter has got not 1 click, but 2 clicks if you keep pushing. So you can get across the cassette really fast. You can also press and hold and it'll shift across the gear range. So this is where we can control our settings for that. You can say never multi-shift when I've just done a single click. Like, let's just assume if I want a lot of gears, I'm going to double click and then hold.
Yeah.
So you can choose whether it'll do it on the first click or second click or both, and then how fast it'll go and if there's a limit or not. So you can build in a limit of only ever do 3 gears. I'll leave you with your defaults, which is a normal speed. You could make it go slower or faster.
How much faster are we talking? Like, oh yeah, very fast.
That's very fast. Well, let's give it a shot. There we go. That's very fast. We got cranks.
We got cranks.
Yeah. This one stays about the same, or gets a little bit heavier. The cross-country one stays basically the same weight, but gets stronger, easier to work on. So we'll see the pinch bolts on the left side of the XTR cranks.
Okay.
Yeah. Plays well with the one-piece forged design and easy to get on and off if you need to change chainring sizes.
Is the chainring interface same as before?
It's the same splined interface as before, yeah. So we've got some interchangeability with existing chainrings that are on the market. This is now a dedicated 55mm chain line, so there's no spacers between the crank and the frame. It just is always a 55mm chain line. The other thing that we kind of didn't like about the outgoing XTR cassette is that the largest 3 cogs were black. They're the aluminum ones. And the surface treatment that we use on XT and SLX is naturally black, and so it's super tough and durable. The surface treatment that we use on XTR is better, but it's not black.
Okay.
So we had to paint them, and then that paint would rub off immediately. So this is kind of a dark gray, but it's a very nice surface treatment that keeps those cogs running smooth for a really long time, and then there's no paint to rub off.
Sweet.
I know people love the current Shimano clutch, but this does some stuff a whole lot better.
Okay.
For one thing, right, like if I'm hanging out at Whistler at a bike festival or something, at least once throughout the day, I'm going to see somebody riding around with their switch off because they forgot to turn it back on, and they're just riding around with a noisy derailleur. So this one you can't forget.
Yep.
It's just engaged all the time. Has got a smooth, I guess, consistently high tension on it. So the clutch, the way that it worked and the reason that it worked that way is all kind of part of the story. That the clutch increased the breakaway force. This has got the same breakaway force, but it stays high all the way.
Okay.
It's kind of the fatal flaw of a clutch is that as soon as that clutch breaks free, that now you've got that wimpy derailleur springs inside of there that's just letting the thing flop around. So you really only get help for those kind of initial breakaway movements going forward. The reason that we didn't use a spring that was just stronger from the very beginning is that springs get really progressive when they get stronger. So if we made that thing strong enough to actually do the job that the clutch was doing, it would be next to impossible to shift when you got to the bigger gears of the cassette. So the engineers came up with a really creative, simple solution. They split the work between 2 springs. So there's just 2 separate springs that are working all the time. That keeps the effort nice and linear, and it allows us to just have higher spring force inside of there. It's also a lot smaller, so we can basically build the whole derailleur off of this wedge shape that we're able to get. This is the part of the derailleur that is the most likely to get hit. It's like your big frontal facing thing that's sticking out. And it's also the part of the derailleur that if it gets hit, it's the most likely to cause a failure. A big part of that is because clutch units take up a lot of space. And so you have to have really thin walls throughout the stabilizer body, the P body, that's what we call it because it's what the pulley cage attaches to. Or how our derailleurs have worked before is that they come to a really thin plate for us to mount the clutch onto. So it looks big and beefy, but if you take off the cover and take off the clutch, you see that it's actually getting pretty thin right there where the clutch actually mounts to. So in order to make a derailleur stronger, we needed to make this P body nice and strong, and we needed to reduce the surface area as much as possible. So we then followed that wedge shape from the stabilizer kind of just starts as low profile in the beginning, but then the whole thing kind of follows it and turns into a wedge. So the idea is that if you hit a rock, it'll hit kind of the wedge and it'll push the derailleur in. So there's also a torque limiter device inside of there that'll sense the impact and let it move out of the way, and then it'll come back on its own immediately afterwards. So the idea is that you hit a rock and it just, this might be easier with a chain on there so you can repeat it. The idea is that you hit a rock and it just pushes it in and then it recovers on its own. So the derailleur is just kind of like glancing off of rocks, getting pushed out of the way, and coming right back on its own. The only reason that you would ever notice is if you happen to be pedaling right after hitting the rock or while hitting the rock, which is pretty rare. So for the most part, it works in the background without you ever noticing. And then a key part of that is that this derailleur is able to rotate backwards. And that was kind of a key thing that we didn't want to give up with a derailleur hanger, is that free rotation point that derailleurs kind of need to be able to get out of the way, and the pulley cage pulls it back after an impact. So if you take away that free rotation point, then you end up with having to do like a manual reset of the derailleur after it takes a hit.
Is any of these pieces where you might be taking impacts replaceable or easily replaceable, or like
no?
I just look at like this whole front piece there, but
it's a very thick stout. It's actually like a composite resin material.
Okay.
So we wouldn't expect it to crack. Because it attaches to the front of the parallelogram, then yeah, it would be next to impossible to replace one of those. Hyperglide Plus is a new technology. We're sticking with 12 speeds. And so no need to just introduce a new chain for the sake of introducing a new chain.
So the master cylinder on these is looking quite a bit larger than previous XTR.
A bit, yeah. And right, so the key cool thing here, we'll be able to see it better once the hose is on there, but we wanted a clean hose routing setup, but we didn't want to build the brake around hoses that go like through the headset, something super extreme. So our kind of idea from the beginning was, let's see if we can make clean hose routing on a traditional external setup. And so the key thing there is having the hose exit the brake lever close to the bar and parallel with the bar. And with a bunch of ergonomic changes that I'll tell you about in just a bit, we pulled the whole thing off, basically moving the pivot point around for the brake lever and controlling our hose exit point by flipping the master cylinder around. So this is a pull master cylinder.
Okay.
Which sounds scary, but we've been doing it for years on road bikes. Those all use a pull master cylinder because they have the exact same kind of weird quirks that you can't have the brake hose just go anywhere. It needs to go under the tape, and the pivot point needs to be where it is on a road bike. So we just took that same kind of basic concept, use a pull master cylinder, and then you can put things wherever you need them.
What is different?
It has got
Just the color?
a more consistent flow rate across a broad range of temperatures. So that's kind of the key thing to consistent performance, is that it flows at the same speed no matter what. So in order for that to work, though, it has to get paired with caliper seals that rebound at the same rate no matter what. So using the new fluid on a current brake where you have that mismatch between the caliper seals and the fluid, that is a recipe for disaster. Sometimes, because this fluid generally, it's a low viscosity fluid, it flows pretty quick. If you get to a hot day and the caliper seals rebound really quickly, then it'll overshoot the reservoir and then the lever will pull to the bar. So don't do it. Okay. But having a low viscosity system that's nice and consistent, that's the key to making the brake more consistent.
Bleed process still the same?
Exactly, yeah. Actually, we've done this bleed process on some brakes before. I think all the current road bike stuff has it, but the bleed nipple is right here, and the valve to turn it is a 3mm wrench back here. So it's a little easier to work with.
What you were talking about with oil being new, seals being new, somebody couldn't just want the new master cylinder and try to attach it to like a current XTR.
There are new seals at both ends, so
Yeah.
yeah, zero interchangeability. Just because everything's fresh, we can can even feel at the brake lever that when the seals or pistons start to slide past the seals, there's like a little pop because they're a little sticky when they're new. So I'm just getting them all past that phase. That it's not really the end of the world. It's just maybe it takes a couple of descents until the lever settles in its final position, and this will get us set up so that the lever position that we set will be likely to be consistent for even your very first descent. We studied a lot about what makes a cooling fin pad rattle, and this is something that really only the fastest riders ever noticed and told us about, but and then I've figured out why I never heard it, is that if you're on the brakes at all, it'll keep it from rattling. So it only happens if you're going through really rough terrain with your fingers off the brakes. So what happens is the pad can move forward and back a little bit, and it feels like it's the brake pad touching the caliper that's causing the rattle, but it's actually the brake pad touching that retaining pin that goes through it. That's where the noise actually comes from. So what we did was we tightened up the fit between the pad and the caliper so that it could move forward and back a little bit like it needs to. It can't be a super tight fit, but it limits that movement. And then we also ovalized that little hole, so when it does move forward and back, it doesn't touch the pin. Okay.
With 1,000 PSI here.
The key thing with the brakes is that it's set up to work with you in an aggressive riding position. So if you're like balanced between the wheels and maybe keeping your weight forward and your elbows are out just a little bit, that means that your fingers aren't reaching straight out and pulling straight back. It means that they're kind of coming at a little bit of an angle. So what we would like, I guess if you can picture the brake lever pivot is moving around some point in space. And so during the first part of it, until it catches up with that pivot point, it's moving outward. When it passes that pivot point, it's going to start moving inward again. So we move that pivot point a lot closer to the handlebar so that the brake lever would be moving out the entire time, which is the way that your fingers are pulling when you're riding like elbows out.
Yeah.
So along those lines, you're also not like palms horizontal and parallel with the earth. You've got a little bit of an angle to them. So these lever blades have got a 5-degree upsweep to them to come out and meet your finger better.
Interesting. Yeah, that's actually pretty noticeable.
Your reach probably isn't going to end up being too much different from what you like on other brakes. I mean, the pivot point on like an Agura or a SRAM brake is pretty far out there. So maybe you'll find yourself coming in just because you were subconsciously trying to get them to engage parallel with the pivot point. And you've got a little bit more freedom to kind of get your engagement point wherever you want.
Yeah, I've never thought about that.
These guys have got their reach adjust inside the lever blade, and it's a fine-tune adjustment. So they're
I was turning one of the ones over there, and they're like really small little movements. It's easy to do like three clicks at a time.
First, hopping on the bike, and you could even ride it like this if you want to, but if you've ridden a Shimano mechanical shifter before, those paddles are going to be in a real familiar place because they're in exactly that spot.
Yep.
We really, we went through a lot of different prototypes of extreme different examples because it's an electronic shifter. You don't need to follow the path of a mechanical shifter. And then the acceptance rate from test riders, the best that you could hope for was about 50%, where people would go, no, I can really appreciate what's better about this. And then the other half would go, this is super confusing, I'm doing the wrong thing, or getting accidental shifts out on the trail. And the only thing that ever got above that was just mimicking a mechanical shifter, which sounds like maybe it's just because people are used to it, but I really, like, the more we've thought about it since then, the more I think that a mechanical shifter was pretty refined already. Like there's this assumed limitation that because it's actually having to pull levers and cables and actuate pulls and stuff, that you are limited on what you could make the mechanical shifter do. But I don't really think that that's true. I think that that basic concept of your differentiation between the two levers being dictated by your thumb unwrapped, like you reach back to get an easier gear and you don't for a harder gear. that intuition is really easy for your brain to latch on to. And so
Yeah.
it's something that we should preserve here. So at the same time though, so familiar initial setup, you can ride it like that. It's good to go. But we wanted to build in the possibility for somebody to do a bunch of fine tuning and customization or try to make it better themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So on the back sides of these paddles are 3mm bolts. And then once we got that loose, this thing is almost on like a ball and socket joint. So we can rotate it
Oh, wow.
forward and back and that way and that way. And so you can basically stick that thing wherever you want. And just a really pleasant thing to start with is just put your thumb on it and then just twist it a little bit so that it's perfectly parallel with your thumb. So you get full surface area contact instead of like grabbing the edge.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that'll be fun to mess around with for sure. And they do, I mean, the feel of them, I mean, it's definitely not the same as the XTR shifter mechanic one I was running all year, but it is very good. I like it. It's super light. Like the push of the shift is crazy light.
Yeah, the that second click, there's a good distinction between them too.
Yeah.
So
Look at that. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go over the bars. Just wrapped up getting everything put on my bike, and we're gonna go for a little shakedown ride. But a lot of good things thus far. We got no wires. Got a lot of trucks out here driving by. Diesel. Shifting is really fast. A lot of adjustments on that shifter. Feels like a lot of things that I think people would hope or expect Shimano to do, they have done so far. So that's it. We're gonna go ride, and then we're gonna cut to months from now me riding, because today's just getting everything set up. I don't want to focus too much on like giving some bottom line on everything, you know. That'll come with time. So mid-test check-in number 1. We're about a month and a half later now, towards the end of January. Been logging a bunch of miles on this stuff. I'm up to about 150 miles, 27,000 feet of climbing, about 25 hours. So I figured it'd be a good time, run through my impressions. It's been very hot, dry, dusty in SoCal, so things are starting to show some wear and tear here and there. So starting from the top, obviously I got a different bike. I did a few laps on that giant Rain that originally I put all these parts on, and then I got this Stump Jumper 15 alloy, and I wanted to put all the parts on this because it gave me a chance to do hands-on installation since Nick handled that the first go around. And it's also kind of like starting from zero. Kind of allowed me to hone in on drivetrain noise, brake noise, little things like that. Before I go into impressions and talk about how everything's been riding, I just want to make a comment about how good I think all this stuff looks. It's sleek, but also pretty bold. And the reason I bring that up is just because I think if you're interested in high-end mountain bike components like this new XTR group set, it's important to be excited about the stuff you're getting. I'm pumped that they gave this all a look that makes me excited to go get my bike and ride it. And I think that's important when you're spending a bunch of money. Okay, I'm gonna breeze through installation real quick since you've already watched all that go down. But obviously the best part about riding a wireless drivetrain is it's so simple to install. So that was really nice. It made it a real quick process to build this bike. The derailleur, very familiar because you have your limits the same as you have with the mechanical drivetrain, so nothing new there. I did have to adjust the B tension, which same as outgoing mechanical XTR. You put it in the easiest pedaling gear, and then there's some marks on the cage that you line up. So real simple there. Nice, easy process to go through. Nothing crazy or complex. Getting into impressions, starting with the shifter. Probably been one of my favorite aspects of this new group set. It's very ergonomical. I set up the buttons the very first day, and I honestly have not touched them. It's nice that you have so much room to change where those are, but it's really hard to beat how familiar where those paddles are if you've been riding a mechanical drivetrain for a number of years like myself. The buttons have a very tactile feel when you engage them. It's very definite that you are engaging a shift, but not so much that it's hard to push those buttons. So you don't get any accidental shifts. There's no question when you have made a gear change. The 2-button feature is a feature that I kind of thought I wasn't going to be that into. Like, you have a multi-shift setting on here, so you can hold it down and run through as many gears as you want. But I found that push through double shift 2 gear feature is really nice in those instances, like you would assume when you come around a turn, it gets real steep and punchy, you can drop 2 gears really quick. The multi-shift feature is maybe equally as functional. The only difference is that when you hold down the shifter and you start running through a bunch of gears, it takes a little bit of like self-calibration to know how long it takes to go through how many gears. You can have more of a tendency to get past the gear that you actually want to end up in. Last thing I want to highlight with the shifter is that we're still using Shimano's iSpec EV clamp interface, which I'm really glad they did that so that we're backwards compatible with previous brakes, clean, simple, all the good stuff. Going into shifting performance, as I'm sure that's what most people are really curious to know about this drivetrain, and shifting speed and consistency has easily been the highlight of this drivetrain so far. It shifts incredibly fast, but I have yet to have any misshifts or bot shifts this far into testing. And now I'm still fairly early on in testing everything, but at the same time, still vlogged quite a few hours, so it's cool to see everything still performing so well at this time. So shift speed is something you can actually adjust in the app. You might be thinking, why would I not just automatically pick the fastest shift setting? And you might want to do that, but what I've found is that when it's in its fastest setting, that I tend to sometimes get shifts that happen so quick, it can be a little disruptive to my cadence. The other end of that spectrum, in the slower shift settings, I have found that reminds me more of shifting experience with the mechanical drivetrain, or kind of similar to SRAM's transmission system, where there's a little bit more of a lull between shifts. And for me, I've liked that a lot when I'm standing and pedaling and shifting into harder pedaling gears, as it's not as disruptive to my cadence. The counter to that is that when you're riding or when you're climbing more technical terrain and you want your shift to come at exact the right moment, almost like when you do a downshift and you need it to happen at like the exact pedal stroke, it can be a little bit slow. I'm going to play around more with kind of the in-between settings, but I think how this is coming in the middle from Shimano is going to fare best for the majority of riders, because it kind of splits the difference of both those worlds. It's fast enough for technical climbing, but maybe you don't run into instances as much where the shifts are happening so quick that it kind of jostles you on the bike. Touching on shift feel and quality, this is still using Hyperguide Plus just like XTR before. So it is very familiar if you've ridden a past Shimano drivetrain. It's very fast. Like even in the faster shift settings, the cassette and the way it throws the chain between gears happens really quickly. And what I found is that while that can sometimes be disruptive to my cadence, it also can be kind of loud and sound a little bit aggressive. The counter to that is that, like I mentioned earlier, I haven't gotten any misshifts or bot shifts. So while it might let you know you're shifting and sound a little bit crazier, it's so consistent that it almost kind of makes up for it. All right, then one last thing I do like is that the cassette, chain ring, all this stuff is backwards compatible. So minus the finish on the cassette being different than previous XTR, like your gear spread is still the same. And that gives you the option to just get the shifter and the derailleur to go wireless if you already have a Shimano drivetrain, which is really nice. It's a cheaper way to get wireless and electronics than some of the other systems that are out there right now. Moving on to wear thus far. Cosmetically, everything is actually looking really good. Starting with the cassette, for anybody that's had XT or XTR cassettes in the past and they have two different finishes, starts to look pretty bad pretty quick, I'm not gonna lie. This new cassette, having a new finish on it, it's not showing nearly as much cosmetic wear. Probably the most wear is visible on the shift ramps where the chain's jumping between gears, but there's like no botched teeth, no high areas of wear that are having me concerned at this point. And then the derailleur, I haven't hit it on anything yet, so cosmetically a few scratches and scuffs, but still looking really good. Probably the one area that's been a little bit of disappointment is the cranks themselves. The clear sticker that comes on them honestly started to wear off on probably like the second or third ride. Again, I'm running flats. I run my feet pretty close to my cranks, more so than if I was running clips. So there's been a little bit of extra wear going on there, but it is a bit of a bummer getting nice hand cranks that look as good as these and then to have the stickers rubbing off so fast. All right, let's talk about noise. I'm sure everybody's really hopeful that this is going to be as quiet as some of the other electronic wireless drivetrains out there. And I'm happy to report that this derailleur has been very quiet, way quieter than mechanical XTR that I was riding all last year. It is definitely up there with transmission thus far. The clutch has been solid. It doesn't feel like it's wearing out or anything like that, and it's made this bike very quiet. Probably the most noise that I have encountered with this whole XTR kit has come from mainly my rear brake rattling against the handlebars. I have found a solution in running the rear brake outside of my shifter cable here, which pushes it further away from my handlebar, and then attaching it to some of my other cables. It's nice that I found a solution. It's kind of frustrating to find a solution that wasn't a problem on outgoing XTR brakes or other brakes that exist out there. Other than that, I would say the only other noise I've experienced is that familiar kind of Shimano rotor rattle, and then a little bit of pad rattle only when I'm braking. The finned pads rattling on Shimano brakes has been a point of contention for quite a while. These are definitely better than outgoing XTR brakes in my experience. The rattling I'm getting is only when I'm braking now, where I feel like on previous XTR or XT, I would get a bit of rattle just like coasting over like bumpy trails. I am gonna try the trick of putting some like Velcro or masking tape on the other underside of the fins to separate them from the caliper body itself. I'm not sure, honestly, if that even is what's causing the noise at this point, but I'm gonna chase down and see if that is the problem going on here. All right, wrapping this up with brake performance. So far, these have felt pretty on par and similar to past XTR brakes to me. About the same amount of power, same amount of grabbiness, which in my experience and the way I like to brake is a little bit below some of the other brake options that are out there. However, to me, the amount of power these have and the way it allows you to control that power makes for probably some of the best modulation on the market. The pull of the lever feels very similar to previous XTR to me so far. Like, you have quite a bit of throw, which is what gives you that good modulation because you can build power through a wider range. The only downside of that to me is if you're riding steep trails or you have moments where you need to brake in a really short amount of time and brake a lot, you kind of have to move the lever and build that power through that whole throw and all of that modulation. So that to me is what makes them not feel as grabby, maybe as all out powerful as some other brakes out there. But for the way I like to brake, having a lot of control, I've been, same as with the previous XTR, I've been a fan of these brakes and being able to control that power that they offer. Going back to talking about installation, because I did skip over the brakes, when I had to bleed this rear brake through the frame, very familiar process, same as Shimano brakes of the past. You now have a tooled bleed port on the caliper, which did make that end of the bleed process a lot easier. The one caveat is that I have yet to get the rear brake to feel exactly how I want. These brakes use a new oil, and I was only given a little bit of sample oil when I left Shimano. So I haven't been able to bleed these exactly how I want. So it's a caveat because I don't want to dive too much into performance just yet because I haven't gotten the rear brake lever feel to be exactly how I want. Like, I've done some lever bleeds, I did a gravity bleed when I built this bike, and it's still a little bit mushy, which tells me that the air still exists in the line. I think that probably answers people's question of like, are these easier to bleed than previous XTR, other Shimano brakes? And I would say that they're very similar in the sense that it might take a couple of bleeds to work all of the air and bubbles out of the line. So between now and when this stuff launches in April, the goal is to continue working towards answering that question of, is Shimano now a key player in the electronic wireless drivetrain space? And up to this point, I would definitely say that they're in the mix and they're steadily climbing towards the top.
All right, it's been 4 months since our last check-in, and it's time to give a final update on how everything has held up, what I've liked and disliked, and to finally give a bottom line on Shimano's new XTR Di2 group set and new XTR brakes. So buckle up, there's a lot to go over. So Shimano actually pushed the embargo for everything back. It originally was supposed to launch at the beginning of April, which has given me way more time than usual to test, which has been great because that was the whole concept of this video, get actual ride time in on everything and see how it holds up. In total, I was able to rack up 560 miles and 63 hours of testing. I managed to find some wetter weather over the winter to put things through the ringer, and then to really finish things off, I spent a week in Finale Liguri, Italy, which felt like the proper send-off for testing as the trails there are long and rough. It was consistently muddy the whole time I was there. All right, I want to go ahead and start with brake performance first. So back in January, I made a comment how I was struggling with the rear brake to feel the way I wanted, and I was waiting on more of Shimano's new low viscosity oil to do more bleeds, try to get the bite point to be where I wanted. Well, it turns out I actually got a defective rear brake. The brakes I got back in December were samples, and after about a dozen bleeds that didn't fix the issue, Shimano decided just to send me a new production caliper and brake line. And luckily that solved the soft bite point issues I was having. I actually only had to do a lever cut bleed when I installed it, and it's felt great ever since. The front brake has remained consistent the entire time I've been testing it. I've only done a couple lever bleeds just more as a precautionary measure, but other than that, it's felt fine. It's been pretty much perfect since December. I know a lot of riders watching this have had issues with Shimano brakes in the past. I've had my fair share of problems. What I will say is I've had better luck with the previous generation XTR brakes, and this set in particular has given me no issues and been very consistent once I got them properly bled. Like any brake system, taking the time to get a proper bleed really can make all the difference. With these, I advanced the pistons to make sure there's no air hiding the caliper. I did a gravity bleed. I put the caliper in a bunch of different positions just to try to make sure, again, there's no air hiding in there. And then really just tapping the crap out of the line, the lever, and the caliper, taking the time to kind of do all those steps and give the brake the best chance to perform properly, I think is really important before you can really write off any braking system. And I know I mentioned it back in January, but the change to a tooled bleed port on the caliper really does make the bleeding process just that much simpler. Personally, I think Shimano has one of the easiest brake systems to bleed, so it's nice to have one little change that kind of furthers that, making it a little bit easier. Most of my on-trail impressions from back in January have honestly held pretty true. For better or worse, the brakes offer similar power compared to the previous XTR brakes. If you enjoyed the feel of XTRs in the past, you can expect a very similar feel with the new brakes. To me, the standout characteristics has been their modulation and calm power delivery. Unfortunately, if you compare the brakes to the likes of SRAM Mavens, Hayes Dominion, Hope V4s, Magura MT7s, these just simply do not have as much peak power. With that said, I would say for 95% of the testing and riding I did, these had more than enough power to slow me down in a controlled manner. I'm actually quite a big fan of the way the power builds throughout the lever throw with XTRs, and then once you are on the brakes, you have a lot of control over how you apply that power. They're definitely not the grabbiest or touchiest brakes compared to other brakes that are out there, but for the way I like to brake, personally, I think that's a good thing. The 5% of the time I didn't like the brakes was any steep chute or sections of trail that had aggressive changes in speed. In those moments where you've got like a split second to shut it down, I didn't always have the power I needed to ride confidently. I did find the lever throw to be longer than I personally like, and unfortunately there's no pad contact adjustment to easily shorten that lever throw. At this point, I'm still not really convinced that that free stroke adjustment really makes that much of a difference. I had way better luck making a noticeable change by slightly advancing the pistons and then going to thicker 2mm rotors. That got me to the shorter lever stroke I was looking for. The lever blade itself, as I mentioned back in January, has a different feel that isn't bad or better than before, it's just different. It's something that you kind of get used to quickly and then will only notice if you're switching between bikes that have different brakes. I do really like the new dialed reach adjustment as it allows for smaller changes in reach to be made compared to the previous design. I did try both metallic and resin pads, which provided somewhat obvious results. I prefer the metallic pads as they increase the bite of the brake slightly, while the organic pads just further accentuated that kind of calm build and power. Other than that, there wasn't much of a difference between pad materials. Changing pads didn't affect brake fade. I noticed more of a change going to thicker rotors, which made for a more consistent lever feel and more consistent bite later into descents. And finally, I'm sad to report back that the pads in the new XTR brakes still rattle. They rattle when you're braking, and they rattle when you're not braking, just riding through chatter. It's not the most consistent noise or always the most noticeable, but it is a noise that occurred periodically throughout every ride I did. I tried putting Velcro between the pad fins and caliper, which didn't really actually resolve the noise entirely. I think over time, I just got used to the kind of clanking thud that it makes. As far as I'm aware, Shimano only has fin pads at this time for the new XTRs, but in the future, I'm sure there'll be finless pads or aftermarket options, and I'd be curious to see if that solves the issue entirely. Overall, the new XTRs maintain that excellent modulation and wide range of power that was such a highlight of the previous generation. They're not more powerful than before, but I think they still offer enough power to satisfy the needs of most riders and most trails. They also maintain the easy, foolproof bleeding process that they had before, and the change to a wider caliper opens up the option for more tuning with thicker rotors and different pad materials. The downsides are the pads still rattle and they don't offer as much peak power as other brakes that are on the market right now. Moving on to shifting performance, I need to start by retracting some of what I said before, which was that the speed of shifts was disrupting my cadence. It turns out that was actually just a product of riding a low engagement hub. I switched wheels a few times this year, and once I started riding a higher engagement hub, like this one that has 72 points, I rarely noticed the shock of shifts through my feet. Impressively, I'm 6 months into testing and shifting has remained incredibly consistent. I've had a few missed shifts along the way, but overall, the shifting performance has lived up to what I expect from Shimano. You get that crisp, direct feel that doesn't leave you questioning or wondering if a gear change is going to go over smoothly. I also haven't had to make any adjustments to the derailleur during the entire test, which is really cool to see. I've done my best to overwhelm the system, aggressively shifting multiple gears at a time up and down the cassette, but it's rarely faulted, so I can't confirm it is hack-proof for all you aggro shifters out there. I will say it can be loud sometimes during shifts. It's not really something that bothers me terribly much, but for whatever reason, probably every 50th shift will produce a nice twang sound that kind of resonates through the bike. It's actually something I've always experienced with Shimano. I think the speed at which the Di2 system can change gears seems to increase the frequency of these loud shifts though. And speaking of speed, this system shifts damn fast. I mean, it is easily the fastest shifting drivetrain I've ever experienced. It's faster than SRAM's transmission, it's faster than any mechanical system I've ridden, and I've primarily tested it in the stock middle setting. I could see XC riders finding the faster two modes appealing when pushing on climbs or maybe like in a race environment, and then the lower two modes seem more appropriate for e-biking when you don't want to run the risk of just mashing the chain through a bunch of gears when you're under the load of the motor. But regardless, all the settings are super fast, and I think most riders will find the middle setting is just right for most riding scenarios. Overall, the shifting experience has honestly been exceptional. I think you get a really nice best of both worlds where the shifting is consistent over time, but it's also incredibly fast. Personally, there's not really much more you can ask for. Moving on to component performance and wear. Honestly, everything has held up as good, if not better, than I would expect after this much testing in mixed conditions with a lot of rough descents mixed in. I'm most pleased with the cassette, which has held onto its finish way better than the previous XTR cassette. There's a few teeth that are more polished than others, but overall there's plenty of miles left in it. My only knock is that the cassette is still made up of multiple pieces, which adds some time during installation. I would say I'm the most disappointed by how the cranks have fared, as they've acquired a decent amount of scratches and scuffs and look more beat up than I would expect after this much testing. I also wish the protective sticker would have lasted more than just a few weeks. The chainring is showing more wear than the cassette. Could just be a result of riding a lot of rough trails and the chain tugging on it. It's still got plenty of life left in it, but I'll likely look at replacing it once the chain needs replacing. So the cassette was a highlight due to its durability, but I would say the shifter has been a highlight of the group set due to its functionality. Shimano crushed it with ergonomics and the light actuation of the buttons. It might be a little bit bigger than SRAM's pods, but I think it tucks up better to the bar and is placed in a more natural position. Everyone that's pedaled my bike around, they usually comment on how fast the shifting is and then how comfortable and easy it is to engage the shifter. I've also really grown to love the double shift feature as such an efficient way to dump gears. It's also a nice carryover from Shimano's mechanical systems. I can see the argument that this shifter maybe seems like it's lazy in design or non-innovative because it mirrors a traditional mechanical shifter, but personally, in my experience, I've always struggled to get SRAM's pod shifters exactly where I want. And for me, this gives me the familiarity and the adjustments I need to get the shifter paddles exactly where I want. And maybe, just maybe, there's a reason that We had paddles on shifters in the position they were for like multiple decades. All right, finally, the grand finale of the new XTR Di2 group set is of course the wireless derailleur. This thing has held up super well. It's got some minor scuffs, but nothing major. I'm not sure if it's the new Shadow ES design or just good luck, but I never smashed it on anything, never had to test the new impact recovery function. It is nice that that feature is there, as it definitely adds a little bit of peace of mind. When I returned from my week of riding finale, I put this bike back together, the upper pulley on the derailleur was seized. I had to pull the seals on the bearing, clean it out, re-grease it. I got it back spinning perfectly smooth and fine. It's not the most surprising or shocking thing to have a derailleur pulley go out. They're also cheap and easy to replace. With that said, it was a little shocking as I have not ridden this bike that much in adverse conditions, so it is something to keep in mind moving forward. As I mentioned, I haven't had to make any adjustments to the limits or B-tension screws. Battery life has been super impressive. The first charge on the battery from way back in December made it 220 miles in over 30 hours. Since then, I've charged the battery a few times, but it's been more out of precaution than out of necessity. Getting the battery cover off and on definitely takes a little bit more finesse and isn't the smoothest design. It does make for a clean outer edge on the derailleur, and thus far, it hasn't given me any problems. It stayed in place, it's been all good. So probably the question everybody wants the answer to most is, how has the clutch fared and has the derailleur remained quiet? Well, the answer is yes, mostly, but as time has gone on, it has gotten a little bit louder. To make the obvious comparison, it is louder than any SRAM transmission derailleur I've ridden. However, it is quieter than the previous mechanical XTR derailleur. Noise varied based on terrain and soil conditions. The derailleur actually handles small, high-frequency bumps pretty well. As those compressions get bigger and more violent, it has a very distinct knocking noise. I think some of that noise comes from the cage whipping, but also the derailleur rotating on the hanger mount and knocking on the B-tension plate. Again, it's still quieter than the previous XTR derailleur, so it's by no means excessively loud. But compared to its #1 wireless competitor, the Di2 derailleur makes itself more heard when you're out on the trail. I will say the actual sound that the derailleur makes as it changes gears is not as loud as the robotic sound that a transmission derailleur makes. The last point I want to touch on with the derailleur is the fact that it uses a derailleur hanger, which I can imagine will be a hang-up for some people. Transmission, with its hangerless mounting interface, does make for a very robust rear mech. I think we've almost become wired to think that derailleur hangers are outdated now because of transmission. However, we used derailleur hangers for decades. I never really had an issue with replacing a bent hanger if it meant that my derailleur itself did not take the brunt of an impact. I do think it's a bit of a moot point since the derailleur has worked so well during testing and it hasn't been any less durable. I also liked having adjustments still to keep everything running smoothly. The one downside though for sure is the fact that the derailleur can rotate around its mounting point, and that has led to some noise throughout testing. Lastly, I want to touch on how the weight and price of XTR Di2 compares to mechanical XTR and transmission. If you want the entire Di2 group set, you're looking at $1,930. If you just want to upgrade to wireless, the upgrade kit that includes a shifter, derailleur, charger, and quick link retails for $985. For comparison, SRAM's GX transmission group set retails for $1,100, XO transmission retails for $1,600, and XX transmission retails for just over $2,000. And then Shimano's mechanical XTR group set retails for $1,500. So on one hand, you can get Di2 wireless shifting for less than electronic transmission, but if you want the entire group set, you're going to pay a premium price tag that's closer in price to XX transmission. You could also get creative by mixing and matching different tiers of Shimano drivetrains. For example, you go with an XT cassette, XT cranks, along with the XTR Di2 upgrade kit. That would land you somewhere around $1,300. And then of course, if you wanted to, you could go with even lower group sets such as Derailleur, mix and match, end up with an even cheaper wireless electronic drivetrain if that was your ultimate goal. The caveat is that XTR Di2 is lighter than GX and XO transmission, and it's only about 20 grams heavier than XX transmission. The XTR Di2 derailleur is lighter than any transmission derailleur, and the cassette is almost as light as their XX SL cassette. The new cranks and chainring are what tack on the most weight. However, compared to XX, they are only 25 grams heavier. So while it's priced higher than GX and XO, the XTR Di2 group set is more competitive with XX or XXSL when it comes to weight. So what's the bottom line on Shimano's new XTR Di2 drivetrain and brakes? Is Shimano now a key player in the wireless electronic drivetrain space? The answer is yes, 100%. If you enjoyed the bulletproof quality shifting of Shimano's Hyperglide Plus tech, and you want the fastest wireless electronic drivetrain on the market right now, this is your answer. The shifter ergonomics, durability of the components, and the ability to make adjustments to the derailleur to keep it running smooth are all standouts. Not to mention the brakes continue to offer excellent control and modulation and are very easy to bleed. The downsides are that it still uses a derailleur hanger, which I know some of you will find outdated. The derailleur lacks any replaceable parts, the brake pads still rattle, and the derailleur is not as sound deadening as SRAM's transmission. Personally, I was also hoping for a cassette with fewer pieces to simplify installation and a way to lock the derailleur when removing the wheel, but you can't always have your cake and eat it too. Overall, I think Shimano has placed itself well to appeal to numerous riders with this new drivetrain. From the electronic curious who are just looking for the cheapest way to go wireless, to riders who want a top-of-the-line, light electronic drivetrain, or just for any of those riders out there who are looking for an alternative to what SRAM currently offers. All right, that concludes our long-term test of Shimano's new XTR Di2 group set and XTR brakes. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what Shimano has created here. If you're looking for more details on each component, what crank arm sizes are available, what chain line everything runs on, head to the link in the description below. We have a deep dive article running through all the tech and nitty gritty of both the brakes and the drivetrain. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And for more mountain bike news and reviews, you can head to vitalmtb.com. Cheers. I feel like I should also mention that my voice sounds crazy and not the same as the start of this video. I have laryngitis, so I'm just stoked I made it through all of this talking head. Hopefully you can understand me. Hopefully for the next video, I don't sound like this.